West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
As Rachel and I were discussing at the beginning of this hour, we were wondering what you knew and when you knew it about Konstantin Kilimnik passing information to Russian intelligence services.
Well, Lawrence, as you pointed out, the chain here is the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and his deputy chairman are giving polling data and strategic information about their strategy in the Midwest to Kilimnik, who the deputy chairman acknowledges they knew was a spy or they believed was a spy. And in fact, as the Treasury Department has acknowledged, was a spy and was providing this to Russian intelligence, and not just Russian intelligence, but the same services that are involved in trying to help Trump win in that election. That's what most people would call collusion. And I don't know how the no collusion crowd explains that. So in terms of when did we know this, we certainly knew for a long time that the Trump campaign was giving internal polling data and strategic information to someone linked to Russian intelligence. But this goes further and says that this was an intelligence agent. That was the Senate Intelligence Committee's bipartisan conclusion. And now we know that this information got back to these intelligence agencies. So pretty direct chain here.
Can you tell us if this is newly developed information developed during the Biden administration, or whether this was known within the intelligence community during the Trump administration?
You know, that's a good question. We certainly knew that there were links between Kilimnik and Russian intelligence. But this statement by Treasury goes further than anything I've seen the intelligence community relate so far. Now, it may very well be that the agencies had reached this conclusion before, and I don't know whether that was shared or not shared, but it's the first time that I'm seeing it in print, and certainly the first time it's being made public.
What else do you think we might end up learning? In what areas might we end up learning new things about 2016 or 2020 elections?
Well, I think we'll continue to learn more, and this is frequently the case with the intelligence process, and that is you may learn about past events when you get new information, when you get new data, because it's historic data. It's not data about the present. So hard to tell, but I think as we're seeing now with this additional information about Manafort, that either Mueller had the information but was trying to protect sources and methods, or this is truly new information that came about either during the Trump administration or during the Biden administration. And I'm not clear exactly when that point was.
What is your reaction to the sanctions as they were issued today?
Very powerful. It will definitely put a crimp in the Russian economy. And it's the kind of sanction that the Biden administration can turn the screws on. So they have the flexibility to really clamp down further if the Russians escalate or continue to engage in this kind of malign conduct, this kind of election interference, so this kind of cyber hacking or attacking. I like the fact that they're going after these Russian private companies that are aiding in these destructive hacks, and that they're going after individuals that have culpability in terms of Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea. So it's pretty dramatic, I have to say. When I saw them, I thought, thank God we have a president again who's willing to stand up to Vladimir Putin.
And what do you think that means in terms of our relations with Russia now that Vladimir Putin understands clearly, as of today, more vividly than before even, the difference between dealing with a Trump presidency and a Biden presidency?
Well, first off, he knows he's not going to manipulate this president simply by flattering him, praising him in some way. That he has to fear this president. This president is willing to follow through. These are not hollow words, that the president is taking action. But at the same time, I think the administration is being very smart and being very open and saying, look, we're willing to meet with you. We're willing to sit down with you. We're willing to find common ground on things like the limitation of nuclear arms. But you engage in this other stuff, and we're going to come after you, and we're not fooling around. And that's, I think, the way you need to treat the Russians, which is don't take them by surprise. Tell them what you're going to do, and if they cross the line, you got to make sure you do it.
And what other devices, techniques, strategies does the administration have beyond sanctions if there's more to respond to?
I think the most powerful thing, and sanctions, truly have their limits, and we found out just how limited ultimately the impact of sanctions can be. But what this administration can do is rebuild our international alliances, rebuild a multinational strategy when it comes to constraining bad actors like Russia. We can strengthen the international institutions that have atrophied over the last 4 years, that give teeth to the rule of law and the rule, and the rule of the road. And so, building those international partnerships, frankly, is something that terrifies the Russians. But more than that, it also terrifies the Chinese. China has been really able to exploit the fact that traditional allies of ours have been alienated from us. But that's not going to be the case anymore.
It is Friday, the 16th of April of 2021. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, we started off the morning with news of, not only a mass shooting at a FedEx facility. Yeah, we got those going on. But Adam Schiff at the top breaking it down how, for the first time, the U.S. government, the Treasury Department to be specific, has released the report that shows there was treasonous conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign to destroy America and democracy. I don't think you'll destroy America so much, but they did really attempt to destroy democracy. And the work goes on because the work was begun before Vlad even started. Vlad looked around and said, well, I'm just going to get to work with the people trying to destroy democracy already. And that would be the GOP. So, somehow Russia was able to change the Republican platform during the convention and no one knew. How did that work? Well, we knew. All of us said it happened and we had to live with the damn election, and we did. And then when we kicked that mofo out, our election was called fake, and they tried to violently overthrow the election by storming the Capitol. See the difference? We knew for a fact that Trump treasonously conspired with Russia to help his campaign win the election, and that indeed happened. And every step of the way during his administration, not once. Oh, I know he's supposedly leveled some sanctions against Russia, but then immediately, within months, overturned it secretly, as a matter of fact, a couple of times. We don't know what deals were brokered between Vlad and Trump during those secret meetings. He was selling out America. He sold out America decades ago because, let's be clear, Trump has been a useful idiot, an asset, what have you, for decades. I would say all the way back to Ivana. In fact, I will just remind folks that back in the day, a lot of us speculated, what if Trump is doing something with Russia? And that was when they were still commies, the Soviets. Who knows? Criminal enterprises always look for, fertile ground in which to criminally enterprise. And Russia just happened to have all the hallmarks of what was needed. Vladimir Putin knew it as a KGB. And look where he is now. A lot of people forget that he was KGB because KGB was devoted pretty much to advancing the cause of socialism, whatever that is. And now he's a mobster. Yeah, well, c'est la vie, as they say in France. C'est la vie. So we got that going for us. Yeah, is it nice? Because what type of repercussions will be had from it? We have the Vichy collaborators of the GOP in government right now, which makes them insurgents. They were part of the insurgency on January 6th, and now they sit on committees. Now they get to vote. You got Tom Cotton doing his thing, that racist. You got Jim Jordan. You got Rand Paul. Back in the day, when they were rooting out commies from every nook and cranny across the great United States, no one was safe. Kindergarten teacher, that's a commie. Yeah, well, they were no longer a kindergarten teacher, and somehow they weren't allowed to live in an area, even though they weren't actually, at gunpoint forced out. They left anyway, under threat. So let's just be clear. How is it that we have all of these treasonous insurgents walking amongst us in our midst, and nothing happens to them? And in fact, they get to go home, sometimes with an ankle bracelet, sometimes not. Why is that? Well, I would say that the work to undermine democracy has been decades in the making. All that Vlad had to do was look around and say, hey, we'll just go with those that are destroying America already. And, as Khrushchev aptly noted back in the day, when Russia comes to pretty much grind the United States and capitalism under the heel of its iron boot, you can rest assured the American capitalists will sell the rope that they hang us with first. Well, that's a paraphrase, but you get the gist of it. And now we have a mob, an organized mob government, pretty much saying, hey, you going to sell me that rope, or am I just going to take it from you? Okay. Let's also remember they have a GDP that's just about that of Italy's, and I would think that actually it's a little bit below Italy's right now. So the sanctions that we can impose will have a dramatic impact, unfortunately, upon also the people who are against Vlad in Russia. But we have to do something. And I got to say, I'm not into the convenient falls from 5-story buildings. I don't like that. The convenient polonium poisonings. We don't need to do that. But they want an influence campaign. Well, I guess we've been doing it for decades too. They buy Levi's. They were buying Levi's before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Surreptitiously, of course. But our influence has been wide, shall we say. Maybe we should up the influence campaign. Maybe we should make democracy, well, a viable form of government in which the people decide. Wouldn't that be nice? What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as we start off on this Blue Moon Spirits Fridays? A Colorado geophysicist will remain jailed for his part in the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Yeah, a federal judge said he's a flight risk. Florida's racist anti-riot bill is headed to DeSantis for signing. And when I say racist, I am not kidding. And Biden nominee Samantha Power moves toward her confirmation to lead the U.S. Agency for International Development. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a fourth wave of the virus that is raging across Japan has cast more doubt on the start of the Summer Olympics in Tokyo in less than 100 days. And a Canadian Parliament member was caught stark naked in a virtual meeting of the House of Commons. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and that chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, right there by the social media scroll near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. If you look across to the left of the page, there is our Patreon link. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage allows us to fulfill our civic duty. And what is that? Well, Resistance Radio has been resisting here at Netroots Radio for 10 years. This year is our 10th year anniversary of continuous 24/7, 365 Resistance Radio, as the founders originally intended. Now, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we put those dollars in with our dollars and we pay our bills. We fly under the radar, and we continue resisting as those founders originally intended, as I mentioned, oh, so many years ago. Okay, Oxford comma was needed somewhere there, but you know what I mean. Thank you so much for your generosity, and we will continue because the founders originally intended it. Indeed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is just so simple. All you have to do is go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom made it simple, and Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Takes care of a lot of other things, too. Thank you for that as well. If you would like to follow me, and I suggest you do, follow me at Justice Putnam on Twitter, and I post the show notes and links diary. That's why you should follow me. I post it on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I scramble to get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who they are. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found mixed in with all the rest of us. Okay, well, I failed to mention about Berbert and Green being the only two members of our legislative bodies to vote against the bone marrow cancer bill that was wending its way through the Congress. Oh, my God. Okay, I guess anything that a liberal wants, they're just going to vote against, even if it means funding for bone marrow research to stop bone marrow cancer. Okay. You know, if you are actively trying to destroy America and you are part of the Russian conspiracy to destroy democracy and America, you would vote against a bill like that, wouldn't you? All right, let's look at this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because when we're talking about destroying democracy in America, there's been only one party that actively pursued that. Well, not counting the southern slave states. Were they a party? Sort of. Anyway, not counting them. But since then, there's been only one political party in American politics that took up arms to overthrow an election. Yes, we're looking at you, the party of responsibility. So here's a responsible member of that party. Apparently a flight risk because Judge Emmett Sullivan ruled on Wednesday, that Jeffrey Sable, age 51, is a flight risk and could be a danger to the community if he were to be released, and Sable was ordered to be held pending a trial. Now, this offering here in the Bistro Cafe, as we're starting off here, is by anonymous staff at the Associated Press. Well, Sable is a geophysicist, and he's accused of dragging a police officer down the steps of the Capitol to be beaten by an American flag on January 6th. To arm himself, he stripped a vulnerable police officer of his police baton. He then used that stolen police baton to force another officer away from his post and into a mob of rioters who proceeded to viciously attack him, leaving him bleeding from the head, Judge Sullivan wrote in the order. After the attack, prosecutors said Sable, who was born in Utica, New York, booked a flight from Boston Logan to Zurich, Switzerland, where he would not be able to be extradited to the U.S. He abandoned that plan and was arrested in New York after an apparent suicide attempt. Feeling guilty, fella? Sable has been charged with multiple felony and misdemeanor counts stemming from the insurrection. Investigators said he told them he was trying to help the officer by patting him on the back and saying, "We got you, man." Sable's attorneys have argued for his release, noting that he does not have a criminal history and had steady employment and the support of family. Well, if he has the support of a Nazi family, he's still a Nazi. They also said he now understands he was lied to about the 2020 election being stolen, and he was caught up in the frenzy of the crowd during the attack on the Capitol. Well, what about the frenzy as you traveled from Colorado all the way to D.C.? Bobby Cana Calvin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Florida's Republican-controlled legislature approved stiffer penalties against violent protesters, handing a major legislative victory to Governor Ron DeSantis, who began campaigning for the measure last year following a summer of turmoil across the country over the killings of black people by police. A divided Florida Senate approved a so-called anti-riot bill as the trial of a Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, was underway for the death of George Floyd, a black man whose death under Chauvin's knee triggered waves of protest. DeSantis doesn't think you should be upset about that. The measure was sent to Florida's Republican governor as new protests erupted this week in a Minneapolis suburb after another fatal police shooting of a black man. Of course, that black man was 20 years old. During weeks of debate, the spirits of the civil rights movement and the specter of racism wafted through hearing rooms as bill opponents invoked the names of civil rights icons, including the Reverend Martin Luther King. Well, you know, they took woke, and they take Martin Luther King, and they're going to rub your face in it, aren't they? When lawmakers introduced the bill earlier this year, some supporters cast it as a response to the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol by supporters, mostly white, of Donald Trump. But critics debunked that narrative and instead called the legislation an assault against the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as an attempt to curtail their right to free speech and to peacefully assemble. Indeed, the genesis of the measure dates back to a September 21 press conference held by the governor, in which he was joined by Senate President Wilton Simpson and House Speaker Chris Sprowls to condemn the tumults in cities across the country and what he referred to as attacks on law enforcement. After the bill's final passage, DeSantis said he looked forward to signing the measure into law. Now, the measure drew intense passions over the months as community activists from across the state gathered in the state capitol to implore lawmakers to turn down the effort. We know the government wants this piece of legislation. We know that's why it's here. We don't have to do everything the governor wants, Senator Gary Farmer, the chamber's Democratic leader, said. From the start, the legislation appeared cleared for passage by Republican leaders. What came before the state Senate for final approval yesterday, Thursday, was the same measure already approved by the House, which cleared the way for the measure to head to the governor's desk. It would become law immediately upon signing. When signed into law, penalties would be enhanced for crimes committed during a riot or violent protest. It would allow authorities to hold arrested protesters until a first court appearance. Oh, that might be months down the road, won't it? And it would establish new felonies for organizing or participating in a violent demonstration, especially when the cops riot and beat the crap out of you. You violent protester, you. It would also strip local governments of civil liability protections if they interfere with law enforcement's efforts to respond to a violent protest, and added language to state law that could force local governments to justify a reduction in law enforcement budgets. The proposal would also make it a second-degree felony to destroy or demolish a memorial, plaque, flag, painting, structure, or any other object that commemorates historical people or events, especially Southern events. That would be punishable by up to 10 years in prison. You flipped off a Dixie swastika, you're going to jail for a hard time. Rights have limits, and violence is where the law is drawn, said Republican Senator Danny Burgess, who carried the bill in the Senate. This bill is about preventing violence. But some community organizers saw it differently, saying it was designed to muzzle dissent, especially by black and brown people. The American Civil Liberties Union said the new law would give police broad discretion over what constitutes a demonstration and a riot. The bill was purposely designed to embolden the disparate police treatment we have seen over and over again directed towards black and brown people who are exercising their constitutional right to protest. Michael Cookbook, the executive director of the ACLU of Florida, said in a statement. Patricia Zangurli of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Samantha Power, President Joe Biden's choice to lead the U.S. Agency for International Development, eased toward confirmation at a calm hearing where she described foreign aid as an essential tool in counteracting China. China is using its economic leverage and heft, often in a predatory way, not only to change governing practices within countries, but to water down international human rights commitments, Power told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It warrants urgent, immediate, and well-resourced attention, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations said. In the first months of Biden's presidency, his fellow Democrats and Republicans have both taken a hard line on China, repeatedly calling it the biggest security threat to the United States, outside of, well, the white supremacists here already. Lawmakers from both parties brought up hot-button political issues, such as increase in migration from Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Power-backed restoring programs suspended under Trump, seeking to improve conditions in the countries and make migration less appealing. Biden has been criticized from the left and right since he took office in January for mixed messages about whether migrants would be sent home or allowed into the U.S., which critics say is one reason for his surge in arrivals, except that is a Republican Nazi talking point. Let's be clear. Power said she welcomed the restoration of funding for programs to alleviate the causes of migration, such as violence and corruption. Trump's administration had tied Central American assistance to migration. Senator Bob Mendez, the committee's Democratic chairman, said the panel would vote on Power's confirmation as soon as possible after the Senate returns in mid-April from its Easter recess. And that brings us to our break. And why don't we go to our break? And when we get back from said break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, let's talk about Zack, baby. To talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League, it's best just to talk about Zack Snyder, the filmmaker, because at 4 hours and 2 minutes, we have his largest canvas to date on which to see him work his mojo. So without joining his haters or his defenders, let's just step back and look at his style and talk about its effects. Zack Snyder does not hide his director's hand. He overtly uses a number of filmmaking techniques, like disruptive focus adjustments, muted colors, monochromatic palettes, and most notably slow motion. So what's he about here? Well, unlike me, Snyder is not about speed. He does not want to rush you along, which makes him an interesting choice for directing action films. Just sitting with these images that he so carefully constructs can feel like waiting for engines to kick in, but digging a Snyder film means surrendering over to his sense of time. Even in his non-affected scenes, like when Batman finds Aquaman, there's a sense of threat and foreboding, but not of urgency. And I think the slow motion thing is just about visuals. We slow down on the Flash's run not because it's important for Flash to be in the moment, but because it's important to Snyder for us to see Flash in this moment. Snyder rarely uses slow motion to provide insight into character, because character is another thing he is not into. He has characters who face a struggle, usually having to escape from something or defend against something. In doing so, they employ technically impressive savagery, which usually allows them to succeed, although not in a pretty way, their moral shadiness echoed by Snyder's chromatic shading, which again makes him a surprising choice to adapt a collection of our biggest, goodest heroes. Anyway, that's it. Snyder doesn't give much character development. Clark, Bruce, Diana, Arthur, Barry, they're all pretty much the same people at the end of Justice League as they were at the beginning. But their final battle is really well plotted. So, is Zack Snyder's Justice League worth its hype? 4 hours will tell you. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Some birds are relatively easy to study. Ross Crates studies the ones that aren't. He's part of the Difficult Bird Research Group at the Australian National University.
All our study species are quite challenging to study for various reasons, mostly because they're really rare and highly mobile.
One of those difficult birds is the critically endangered Regent honeyeater. They're medium-sized songbirds with bright yellow tails and black and white chests. And though they once roamed Australia in flocks of hundreds, fewer than 300 remain in the wild today. Crates and his team tracked the birds over a 5-year period. If they encountered a male, they'd record his song. And they noted whether the males were paired up with females. They found that a quarter of the birds sang variations of the traditional honeyeater song, and 12% of the birds weren't singing honeyeater songs at all. They were parroting different species songs, like this. Or this one. That could mean bad news for the bird's future, because males singing those untraditional songs were also less likely to be paired up with a mate compared to their counterparts who sang the standard tune.
As females breed less, then there's obviously fewer males in that generation to teach the next generation. Higher proportion of males sing weird songs, and you get a bit of a positive feedback towards extinction.
The work appears in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B. Crates says the honeyeater's loss of songs equates to a loss of culture.
It's a complete sort of animal equivalent of the loss of indigenous languages, whether that be Native American languages or Aboriginal Australian languages here.
He says he hopes it serves as a warning that all is not well in Australia's natural world, and that we must do more to tackle climate change and conservation if we hope to save it. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser, filling in for your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. As the U.S. population ages, more people are at risk for injuries. The largest percentage of injury-related deaths among this group are caused by falls. Elizabeth Burns is with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss ways to prevent injuries and deaths from falls among senior adults. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, what are some of the more common consequences when a senior adult falls?
Well, first, it's important to note that falls are incredibly common. More than 1 in 4 older adults will fall in a given year. Common consequences include loss of independence and an increased fear of falling, as older adults are afraid to do the same kinds of activities they were doing before. And this can actually lead to more falls, as older adults have less strength in their lower body. Common consequences include hip fracture and traumatic brain injury. And ultimately, in 2016, almost 30,000 older adults died because of a fall.
So are falls more common in men or in women?
Falls are more common in women, and more women go to the emergency department because of a fall, and more women die because of a fall. However, the rate of fall deaths are more common in men than women. What this means is that out of 100,000 men, more will die from a fall than out of 100,000 women.
What are common causes of falls among older people?
Getting on and off the toilet and getting in and out of bed are common causes of falls. Walking around the hallways at night when the lights are off is a common way people fall. There's also an increased amount of medications used in seniors, which have side effects like making them lightheaded, and that increases the risk of falls and is a common cause.
With all of those factors, what are some ways our listeners can decrease their chances of falling?
Older adults should talk to their healthcare provider or doctor about how they can decrease their chances of falling. This can be done during the annual wellness visit or during annual physicals. The doctor will recommend an exercise program that should increase strength and balance, or maybe refer you to a physical therapist. Additionally, they can look through your medications and perhaps reduce your doses or suggest medications that decrease your chances of falls.
Are there things we can do to modify our homes to prevent falling?
Oh, absolutely. Installing grab bars on the side of the toilet, making sure that rugs are taped down or removed, making sure that there's lighting in the hallways are all really simple ways that an older adult can modify their home to prevent falls.
Where can listeners go to get more information about preventing falls?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/study, and that's spelled STEADI.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've been talking today with Elizabeth Burns about ways to prevent fall-related injuries and deaths among senior adults. Improving strength and agility through regular exercise and removing potential obstacles in the home can help decrease the risk for falls. If you or a loved one is older and struggle with mobility, talk with a healthcare provider about ways to decrease the risks for fall-related injuries and death. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO. This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men and women in the United States, but it is preventable. Early on, colorectal cancer typically has no symptoms. It starts with a precancerous polyp or abnormal growth in the colon, which can be removed without surgery. Several tests are available to find these polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Screening also finds colorectal cancer early when treatment works best. Recommended screening for adults at average risk begins at age 50 and continues until age 75. Learn about screening test options and find out which tests are covered by insurance. Talk to your healthcare provider about when you should be screened and discuss the best tests for you. For more information about colorectal cancer prevention, please visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Today we launch a brief series on George Mason, who has often been called America's forgotten founder. Mason has not attained the status of a cultural icon that Americans have bestowed upon his Virginia colleagues, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. But his contemporaries certainly recognized his many talents and his historic achievements. Edmund Randolph, Virginia's governor, said that Mason ranked behind none of the sons of Virginia in knowledge of her history and interest. At a glance, he saw to the bottom of every proposition which affected her. Historian Ralph Ketchum wrote that Mason was widely acknowledged as having the most profound understanding of Republican government of any man in Virginia. Madison and Jefferson always deferred to him as their mentor on matters of political theory. That's all for today's podcast. To learn more about George Mason, visit civiced.org/Mason. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
An old political truism notes that where there's a will, there are 1,000 won'ts. And what a hurricane of won'ts swirled out of Washington's power centers in March to pummel Joe Biden. Corporate lobbyists and their congressional hirelings howled at him for declaring that he would seek a tax increase on corporations to pay for the essential overdue job of repairing and expanding our nation's antiquated, dilapidated infrastructure. Blowhard Mitch McConnell, the GOP Senate leader, blustered that poor corporate America should not be singled out to bear this burden. But wait, Mitch singled out the corporate giants in 2017 to receive a massive cut in their tax rate. So even with a slight increase now, they'll pay much less than regular people. Also, the giants worm loopholes in the law to cut their taxes further. Indeed, 55 of the biggest, most profitable corporations paid zero in U.S. income taxes last year. As Bernie Sanders points out, if you paid $120 for a pair of Nike shoes, you paid more to Nike than it paid in federal income taxes over the past 3 years, while it made $4 billion in profits. Mitch and his fellow hypocrites cynically profess that they support restoring America's infrastructure, but, he says, asking our corporate political funders to pay more is not going to get support from our side. So who do they want to pay for it? You, working people and the poor. Senator Roy Blunt, a Missouri Republican and a leader of Mitch's team, points to putting more user fees on drivers and adding taxes on consumers as the way to go. This is Jim Hightower saying, to see a list of other major corporate scofflaws who've been pocketing billions in profits yet paying zilch for the upkeep of America, go to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe. So grab a libation, pull up a virtual chair, and join our freewheeling conversations with political mavericks, musical agitators, and kick-ass grassroots groups. The Lowdown Happy Hour will connect you to good trouble activists who are building people power across America. Get the lowdown at hightowerlowdown.org.
This is the last time for this introduction to the Civil Liberties Minute.
My name is Ramsey Clark, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
As Attorney General under President Lyndon Johnson, Ramsey Clark filed desegregation and voting rights cases in the South and the North. A fierce opponent of capital punishment, he ordered a moratorium on federal executions and banned wiretaps and stopped federal prison construction and required adherence to the Supreme Court's decision in Miranda and helped draft the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In private practice after the 1968 election, Ramsey Clark represented the disadvantaged and war resistors and inmates at Attica during that historic prison rebellion, and Sheikh Omar Abdelrahman, convicted in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. He would represent the despised, including persons accused of war crimes. Ramsey Clark believed in the right to counsel and the obligation of a citizen to speak out when our country violates its principles, and he remained true to the core principles of freedom. As he said, a right is not what someone gives you, it's what no one can take from you. The recent New York Times headline told this sad story. Ramsey Clark, Attorney General and rebel with a cause, is dead at 93.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1854. That was the day wealthy populist and labor advocate Jacob Coxey was born. He grew up in Danville, Pennsylvania, and worked as a stationary engineer in an iron mill. Soon he moved to Ohio and opened a sand quarry. He entered politics and initially campaigned as a candidate for the Greenback Party. By the 1890s, he had thrown his lot in with the populists. When the Panic of 1893 hit, workers flooded the industrial Midwest in search of jobs. Cities across the country were overwhelmed with the newly unemployed begging on the streets. Coxey proposed a good works bill which demanded $500 million for federal jobs. He supported paper currency, public works projects, transportation for rural areas, and full employment. He decided to take his proposal directly to Congress by organizing a protest march on behalf of the unemployed. Hundreds joined him on his march from Ohio to Washington, D.C., forming join Cooksy's army. They set off from Massillon, Ohio on Easter Sunday, 1894, supported by populists and organized labor. Estimates of marchers ranged into the tens of thousands. His army, however, was stopped along the way by court injunctions preventing them from commandeering trains and seizing railway lines as they traveled. About 500 eventually reached Washington, D.C. As Cooksey climbed the steps of the Capitol to demand the Good Jobs Bill, he and his army were met by police forces, which attacked the crowd and beat them back from the Capitol steps. Years later, his campaigning finally paid off, and he was elected mayor of Massillon. In 1944, he was invited back to the Capitol steps to deliver his Good Jobs Bill, which by that time had become official policy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 80 degrees. My gosh. Overnight lows will only be in the mid-40s, which will be nice because we've had much chillier nights, so we don't want that. Looks like mostly sunny today with winds light and variable. Clear skies overnight with lows in that mid-40s with winds light and variable. Sunny skies tomorrow with highs bumping above 80. Winds light and variable. It looks like we'll have similar weather on Sunday. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have spiked once again here in Jackson County. In the southern part of Oregon, it now stands at 9,793. We will soon have 10,000. And unfortunately, the deceased confirmed have increased by one and now stands at 127. Grass pollen is rated moderate here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good for the region at 28 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is high at 6, so take care. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.11 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 76%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. And that's commonly known as the Weather Underground, indeed. London is 51 and fair. Paris is 50 degrees and sunny. Rome is 61 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 50 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 60 and fair. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 60 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 64 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 46 degrees and mostly cloudy with a fog advisory. And New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tokyo's Olympics chief said today, Friday, that Japan was committed to holding a safe games this summer as a surge in COVID-19 cases prompted an expansion of contagion controls and with fresh calls for the games to again be postponed or canceled. The government expanded quasi-emergency measures to 10 regions as a fourth wave of infections spread, casting more doubt on whether the Olympics can be held in Tokyo in fewer than 100 days. We are not thinking of canceling the Olympics, Tokyo 2020 President Saiko Hashimoto said, speaking on behalf of the organizing committee. We will continue to do what we can to implement a thorough safety regimen that will make people feel complete safety. The government added Aichi, Kanagawa, Saitama, and Chiba to 6 other prefectures already under contagion controls, including the cities of Tokyo and Osaka. Japan's top health experts have acknowledged that the COVID-19 pandemic has entered a fourth wave. Daily cases in Osaka reached a record 1,209 today, Friday, driven by a virulent strain of the virus first identified in Britain. New infections in Tokyo were 729 yesterday, Thursday, and most since early to February, when most of the nation was under a state of emergency. Almost 2/3 of Japanese said the Olympics should be canceled or postponed. A senior ruling party official said yesterday, Thursday, that canceling this year's Olympics remains an option if the coronavirus becomes too dire.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Nobody wants to put their name to this article out of the Associated Press, and who can blame them, as we offer you our last amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A Canadian Parliament member was caught stark naked in a virtual meeting of the House of Commons. William Amos, who has represented the Quebec district of Pontiac since 2015, appeared on the screens of his fellow lawmakers completely naked on Wednesday. The pandemic has meant many Canadian lawmakers participate in sessions via video conference instead of in person. A screenshot obtained by the Canadian Press shows Amos standing behind a desk between the Quebec and Canadian flags, his private parts hidden by what appears to be a mobile phone in one hand. And you can go see the photograph at the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos, as linked up on social media like Twitter. This was an unfortunate error, Amos said in a statement sent by email. My video was accidentally turned on as I was changing into my work clothes after going for a jog. I sincerely apologize to my colleagues in the House of Commons for this unintentional distraction. Obviously, it was an honest mistake, and it won't happen again. And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays, completely clothed, by the way. So do stay tuned all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.